The wagon lurched sideways on the narrow mountain trail, and Nora Olsen felt her stomach drop as the world tilted beneath her. But nothing could have prepared her for the sickening crack of wood splintering or the crushing weight that followed when the wheel gave way and pinned her leg beneath its iron rim. Pain exploded through her body, white-hot and blinding. She heard her own scream echo across the canyon walls of the New Mexico wilderness, but the sound seemed distant, as though it belonged to someone else. Dust billowed around her, coating her throat and making each breath a struggle. The wagon had been carrying supplies from Fort Stanton to the mining camp where her father worked, and she had insisted on making the journey alone despite his protests. Now, as she lay trapped beneath hundreds of pounds of wood and iron, she understood his fears had been warranted. The sun beat down mercilessly on the exposed trail, and Nora could feel sweat mixing with tears on her face. She tried to shift her position, to somehow free herself, but the slightest movement sent fresh waves of agony through her leg. She could see it pinned beneath the wheel, bent at an angle that made her stomach turn. Blood seeped through her torn skirt, darkening the brown fabric to black. "Help," she tried to call, but her voice came out as barely a whisper. The trail was rarely used, especially at midday in the summer heat of 1878. She might lie here for hours or days before anyone passed by. The thought made her dizzy with fear. Then she heard it, the sound of hoofbeats approaching. Hope surged through her chest even as consciousness threatened to slip away. She forced her eyes to focus on the bend in the trail, and within moments, a rider appeared astride a buckskin horse. He sat tall in the saddle, his broad-brimmed hat shading his face from the relentless sun. When he saw her trapped beneath the wagon, he spurred his horse forward and dismounted before the animal had fully stopped. "Hold on," he said, his voice steady and calm despite the urgency in his movements. "I am going to get you out of there." Nora tried to respond, but the pain was making everything fuzzy around the edges. She watched through half-closed eyes as the cowboy assessed the situation, his weathered face tight with concentration. He was young, perhaps in his mid-20s, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes the color of summer sky. There was something competent in the way he moved, purposeful and sure. "This is going to hurt," he warned her, positioning himself beside the collapsed wheel. "But I need to lift this off you before we can do anything else." Nora nodded weakly, bracing herself. She watched the muscles in his arms strain as he gripped the wheel, watched his jaw clench with effort as he began to lift. The wagon was heavy, laden with supplies, and for a moment she thought it would be impossible. But then, inch by inch, the crushing weight began to ease. "Now," he grunted, "slide yourself back if you can." She tried to move, but her leg would not cooperate. The cowboy adjusted his grip, his face reddening with exertion as he lifted higher. With his free hand, he reached down and grasped her under the arms, pulling her clear of the wheel. The movement sent lightning bolts of pain through her injured leg, and she cried out despite herself. The moment she was free, he lowered the wagon carefully and dropped to his knees beside her. His hands moved over her leg with surprising gentleness, assessing the damage. Nora could see the concern in his eyes as he examined the break. "It is bad," he said quietly, "but I have seen worse." The bone broke clean through, but it did not pierce the skin. "That is good. That gives us a chance." He looked up at her face, and something in his expression made her want to trust him completely. "My name is Yates Brennan. I work the cattle ranch about 10 miles south of Fort Stanton. I know how to set a break like this, but it is going to hurt worse than anything you have felt so far." "Nora," she managed to say through gritted teeth. "Nora Olsen." "Well, Miss Olsen, I am going to need you to be brave for me." He was already moving, retrieving items from his saddlebags. He returned with a leather strap and placed it between her teeth. Bite down on this when the pain gets too much. She watched him work, admiring despite her agony the efficiency of his movements. He used pieces of a broken wagon plank, tearing strips from his own shirt to pad them. His hands were careful as he positioned the splints along either side of her leg, but when he began to straighten the bone, Nora bit down hard on the leather and felt the world go gray at the edges. "Stay with me," Yates said, his voice cutting through the fog. "Just a little more." She felt the bone shift, felt something click back into place, and then he was binding the splints tight with strips of cloth. His movements never faltered, never hesitated, even as she writhed in pain. When it was done, he sat back on his heels and wiped sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. "There," he said. "That should hold until we can get you to a proper doctor." Nora let the leather strap fall from her mouth, gasping for breath. The pain was still intense, but there was something different about it now, more contained somehow. She looked at the splint he had fashioned and felt a wave of gratitude so strong it brought fresh tears to her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. Yates shook his head. "Do not thank me yet. We still need to get you back to town, and that is going to be a rough ride." He studied her face, seeming to measure her strength. "The wagon is not going anywhere without repairs, and your horse bolted when the wheel broke. I am going to have to take you on my horse." The thought of being moved again made Nora want to weep, but she nodded. There was no other choice. Yates stood and walked to his buckskin, speaking to the animal in low, soothing tones. He led the horse closer and positioned it beside Nora. Then, with a gentleness that seemed at odds with his weathered cowboy exterior, he lifted her into his arms. She was tall for a woman, but he held her as though she weighed nothing at all. "Put your arms around my neck," he instructed, and she obeyed, feeling the solid warmth of him, the strength in his shoulders. He mounted the horse with practiced ease, settling her across his lap so that her injured leg extended to the side, supported by his arm. "Ready?" he asked, and she nodded against his chest, too exhausted and pain-racked to speak. The ride to Fort Stanton was the longest of Nora's life. Every step the horse took sent jolts through her broken leg, and several times she had to bite back screams. But Yates kept up a steady stream of conversation, his voice low and calm, distracting her from the worst of the pain. "I grew up on a ranch in Texas," he told her as they navigated the dusty trail. "My father taught me about setting bones when I was just a boy. We were too far from any town to call a doctor every time someone got hurt, so we learned to handle things ourselves." He adjusted his hold on her slightly, his arm supporting her injured leg more firmly. "I set my first bone when I was 14. My younger brother broke his arm falling off a fence rail. He cried like a baby, but it healed up straight." "Do you miss Texas?" Nora asked, needing to focus on something other than the pain. "Sometimes," Yates admitted, "but New Mexico has its own kind of beauty. The mountains here, the way the light hits them at sunset, I have never seen anything quite like it." He paused, then added quietly, "Though I will admit, it can be a lonely life sometimes." She heard something in his voice, a note of isolation that resonated with her own experience. "I know what you mean," she said. "My mother died 3 years ago, and it has just been my father and me since then. He works the mine and I run our small homestead. There is not much time for socializing." "I am sorry about your mother," Yates said, and she could hear the sincerity in his words. They fell into silence for a while, but it was not uncomfortable. Nora found herself noticing things about him, the way he sat so naturally in the saddle, the care he took to guide his horse around the roughest parts of the trail, the warmth of his body against hers. Under different circumstances, she might have been embarrassed by their closeness, but pain and necessity had stripped away such concerns. "We are almost there," Yates said as they rounded a bend, and the scattered buildings of Fort Stanton came into view. "I am going to take you straight to Doc Martinez. He has an office near the trading post." True to his word, Yates guided his horse through the dusty streets to a small adobe building with a wooden sign that read "Medical Office." He dismounted carefully, holding Nora secure, then lifted her down with the same gentleness he had shown throughout the journey. The doctor was a middle-aged man with silver-streaked hair and kind eyes. He took one look at Nora's splinted leg and nodded approvingly at Yates. "Good work," he said. "Bring her inside." Yates carried her into the office and laid her on the examination table. Doc Martinez cut away the remains of her skirt to examine the leg more thoroughly, and Nora had to look away, not wanting to see the damage. She heard the doctor and Yates speaking in low voices, heard words like clean break and good alignment. "You probably saved this young lady's leg," Doc Martinez said to Yates. "Another hour or two in that heat, with the bone set wrong, and she might have lost it to infection." Nora felt her stomach clench at the thought. She had been closer to disaster than she realized. Doc Martinez cleaned the wounds on her leg and applied proper bandages, then reinforced the splint Yates had made. "You will need to stay off this leg completely for at least 6 weeks," he told her. "After that, we will see how it is healing. You were very lucky, Miss Olsen." "Lucky that Mr. Brennan came along when he did," she said, looking at Yates. He stood near the window, his hat in his hands, and when their eyes met, she saw something flicker across his face that made her heart skip. "Where is your father?" Doc Martinez asked. "Someone needs to stay with you while you recover." "He is at the mining camp," Nora said. "He is not due back for another 2 weeks." The doctor frowned. "You cannot stay alone, not with an injury like this. You will need help with everything for the first few days at least." "I can send word to him," Yates offered. "The camp is not far from my ranch. I could ride out there tonight, let him know what happened." "That still leaves the problem of who will care for Miss Olsen in the meantime," Doc Martinez pointed out. There was a long pause, and then Yates said quietly, "My ranch has a spare room. My housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, is there. It would be proper, and Miss Olsen would have the care she needs until her father can come for her." Nora felt her cheeks warm. "I could not impose like that." "It is not an imposition," Yates said, his blue eyes steady on hers. "You need help, and I am offering it. Besides, I feel somewhat responsible. If I had ridden by just a few minutes earlier, I might have warned you about that trail. The rains last week weakened the ground along that stretch." "You could not have known," Nora protested, but she could see the determination in his face. Doc Martinez looked between them, then nodded. "It is a sensible solution. I will come out to check on you in a few days, Miss Olsen, to see how the leg is healing." And so it was decided. Yates borrowed a small wagon from the livery stable, padded the bed with blankets, and drove Nora out to his ranch as the sun began to set. The journey was smoother than the ride on horseback had been, but by the time they arrived, she was exhausted and feverish with pain. The ranch was larger than she had expected, with a well-built house and several outbuildings spread across a green valley. Yates carried her inside, where a small Chinese woman with gray hair and quick movements immediately began fussing over her. "This is Mrs. Chen," Yates introduced them. "She has been keeping house for me since I bought this place 3 years ago. She is the best cook in the territory, and she does not take nonsense from anyone, including me." Mrs. Chen made a dismissive sound but smiled warmly at Nora. "Poor girl," she said, examining the splinted leg. "You come. I make you comfortable." The spare room was small but clean, with a comfortable bed and a window that looked out over the valley. Mrs. Chen helped Nora into a nightgown, brought her water and a bowl of rich soup, and fussed over her until Yates finally intervened. "Let her rest, Mrs. Chen," he said gently. "She has had a hard day." When they were alone, Yates stood awkwardly in the doorway. "I will ride out at first light to tell your father what happened," he said. "Try to sleep if you can. If you need anything during the night, just call out. My room is just down the hall." "Mr. Brennan," Nora said, and he turned back to look at her. "Thank you for everything. You saved my life today." Something softened in his expression. "Yates," he said. "Just call me Yates, and you are welcome, Nora." After he left, Nora lay in the darkness, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch settling around her. Her leg throbbed with a dull, persistent ache, but Doc Martinez had left laudanum for the pain, and gradually it began to ease. She thought about the man who had rescued her, about the competence and kindness he had shown. She barely knew him, yet she felt safer here than she had in a long time. Sleep claimed her eventually, and she dreamed of blue eyes and strong hands, and a voice that promised everything would be all right. The next morning, Nora woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the smell of coffee wafting from the kitchen. She tried to sit up and immediately regretted it as pain shot through her leg. She fell back against the pillows with a gasp. "Easy now," said Mrs. Chen, appearing in the doorway with a tray. "You need to move slow. Here, I bring you breakfast." The tray held eggs, biscuits, and strong coffee, and Nora realized she was ravenous. She had not eaten since early yesterday morning before setting out on what should have been a simple supply run. "Mr. Yates, he already leave for the mining camp," Mrs. Chen informed her as Nora ate. "He say he be back this evening, with your father maybe tomorrow if the man can leave his work." The day passed slowly. Nora dozed on and off, the laudanum making her drowsy. Mrs. Chen checked on her frequently, bringing water and light meals, helping her with necessities that would have been humiliating if the older woman had not been so matter-of-fact about everything. In the late afternoon, Nora was awake and staring out the window when she heard horses approaching. Her heart lifted at the thought that Yates had returned, but when she heard voices in the main room, she realized he had brought someone with him. Her father burst into the room moments later, his face creased with worry. "Nora," he said, rushing to her bedside. "My God, when that cowboy told me what happened, I thought I had lost you." "I am all right, Papa," she assured him, though seeing his fear made her own eyes water. "Yates, I mean Mr. Brennan, he got me out and set my leg. Doc Martinez says it should heal fine." James Olsen was a bear of a man, weathered by years of hard mining work, but his hands were gentle as he examined her splint. "I should never have let you make that trip alone," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You could not have known the wheel would break," Nora said, echoing what she had told Yates. "It was just bad luck." Her father looked up as Yates appeared in the doorway. "Mr. Brennan," he said, standing to grip the younger man's hand firmly, "I owe you a debt I can never repay. You saved my daughter's life." "Any man would have done the same," Yates said, but Nora saw the faint color rise in his cheeks. "Not any man could have set that break the way you did," James countered. "Doc Martinez told me your work was as good as any physician's. You have my deepest gratitude." They talked for a while, the two men, and Nora listened as her father explained his situation. He could not leave the mine for another week without losing his position, and their homestead was too isolated for Nora to recover there alone. "She can stay here as long as she needs," Yates said firmly. "Mrs. Chen and I will make sure she has everything she requires." James looked between his daughter and the young rancher, and something thoughtful crossed his face. "That is very generous," he said slowly, "if you are sure it is not an imposition." "It is not," Yates assured him. James stayed for supper, which Mrs. Chen served in Nora's room so the family could eat together. The meal was delicious, tender beef and vegetables in a savory sauce, and Nora found herself watching Yates as he talked with her father about ranching and mining and the growth of New Mexico territory. He was intelligent and well-spoken, she realized, and there was a kindness in him that seemed to infuse everything he did. When her father finally left to ride back to the mining camp, promising to return as soon as he could get away, Nora felt strangely bereft. But then Yates came back into her room carrying a stack of books. "I thought you might like something to read," he said, setting them on the small table beside her bed. "The days will be long while you recover." Nora looked at the titles, surprised by the variety. There were novels by Dickens and Austen, books of poetry, even a collection of essays. "These are yours?" she asked. Yates nodded, looking almost embarrassed. "My mother was a school teacher. She insisted all her children learn to read well and widely. I know it is not very cowboy-like, but I still enjoy a good book." "I think it is wonderful," Nora said honestly. "I love to read, but we do not have many books at home. Papa does not see the use of them." "Then you are welcome to read any of these," Yates said. He hesitated, then added, "If you would like, I could read to you sometimes. In the evenings when the work is done. It might help pass the time." The thought of spending her evenings listening to his voice made Nora's heart flutter in a way that had nothing to do with her injury. "I would like that very much," she said, and so a routine developed. During the days, Mrs. Chen cared for Nora, helping her with her needs and keeping her company with cheerful chatter about the ranch and the local gossip. Yates was often out working, tending to his cattle or repairing fences or handling the 100 other tasks that came with running a ranch. But every evening after supper, he would come to her room and read to her. His voice was perfect for it, deep and expressive, and he read with genuine feeling. They worked their way through a novel by Walter Scott, and then started on Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice. Nora found herself looking forward to these evening sessions more than anything else in her day. As the days passed, they began to talk more between chapters, sharing stories about their lives. Yates told her about growing up in Texas, about helping his father drive cattle across miles of open range, about the death of his parents in a fever that swept through their town when he was 21. He had taken his inheritance and come to New Mexico to start fresh, to build something of his own. Nora, in turn, told him about her childhood, about her mother's love of music, and how she used to sing while she worked, about the illness that had taken her so suddenly. She talked about the loneliness of their isolated homestead, about her dreams of one day having a real home with neighbors and community. "I used to imagine what it would be like to have a ranch like this," she admitted one evening. "Somewhere with enough land to really build something, but close enough to town to not feel so cut off from the world." "It is a good life," Yates said quietly, "but you are right about the loneliness. Sometimes I can go days without seeing anyone but Mrs. Chen and the ranch hands. It would be nice to have someone to share it all with." Their eyes met, and Nora felt something electric pass between them. She looked away first, her cheeks warming, but her heart was racing. After 2 weeks, Doc Martinez came out to check on her progress. He examined her leg carefully, testing the splint and asking about her pain levels. "It is healing beautifully," he announced. "You have been taking good care of her, Mr. Brennan." "That is mostly Mrs. Chen's doing," Yates said, but the doctor shook his head. "Mrs. Chen tells me you have barely left the ranch since Miss Olsen arrived, that you have been checking on her throughout the day between your chores. That kind of attention matters in recovery." Nora had not realized how closely Yates had been watching over her, and the knowledge warmed her from the inside out. "You can start putting a little weight on the leg in another week or so," Doc Martinez told her. "But you will need crutches, and you must be very careful. The bone is knitting, but it is still fragile." After the doctor left, Yates disappeared into one of the outbuildings. Nora could hear sawing and hammering, and she wondered what he was doing. She got her answer that evening when he appeared in her doorway carrying a pair of beautifully crafted crutches. "I made these for you," he said, setting them beside her bed. "For when you are ready to start moving around. I padded the tops with sheepskin so they will not rub your arms raw." Nora reached out to touch them, running her fingers over the smooth wood. "They are perfect," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You did not have to do this." "I wanted to," Yates said simply. "I know how hard it is to be confined to one room. I thought you might like to sit out on the porch once you can move around, maybe see the sunset over the valley." It was one more kindness in a long list, and Nora felt something shift inside her. This was more than gratitude she was feeling, more than simple appreciation for his help. She was falling for him, for his quiet strength and his gentle hands, and the way he seemed to genuinely care about her well-being. The realization both thrilled and frightened her. She barely knew him, and yet she felt as though she understood him better than people she had known her whole life. But what did he feel? Was his attentiveness simply natural kindness, or was there something more behind those blue eyes that seemed to see right through her? She got her answer a few days later. She had been practicing with the crutches in her room, building up her strength, when she decided to surprise Yates by making it out to the kitchen on her own. It was slow going, and by the time she reached the doorway, she was sweating and shaking with effort. "Mrs. Chen saw her first and rushed over, scolding her in rapid Chinese mixed with English, but Nora waved her off. "I need to start moving," she insisted. "I cannot stay in that bed forever." Then Yates came in from outside, dusty from a day's work, and stopped dead when he saw her standing in the kitchen. "Nora," he said, and there was something in his voice that made Mrs. Chen smile knowingly and slip away. "I wanted to see if I could do it," Nora explained, suddenly self-conscious. She was wearing one of Mrs. Chen's borrowed dresses. Her hair was braided simply down her back, and she knew she must look a mess. But the way Yates was looking at her made her feel beautiful. "You should have waited for help," he said, crossing to her in a few long strides. "You could have fallen." "But I did not," she pointed out. "I am stronger than I look." "I know," Yates said softly. "I have known that since the day I found you under that wagon, trying not to scream even though you must have been in agony." He reached out as though to touch her face, then seemed to catch himself and dropped his hand. "Nora, I need to tell you something." Her heart was pounding so hard she thought he must be able to hear it. "What is it?" "These past few weeks, getting to know you, spending time with you, it has meant more to me than I can say." He took a breath, and she saw vulnerability in his eyes that took her breath away. "I know this is not how things are usually done. I know I should probably wait longer, be more proper about it. But I am not a fancy man with fancy words, and I just need you to know that I have feelings for you. Real feelings. The kind that keep me awake at night thinking about you in that room down the hall. The kind that make me look for excuses to check on you during the day. The kind that make me hope you will want to stay here even after your leg heals." Nora felt tears spring to her eyes, but they were happy tears. "Yates," she said, balancing carefully on her crutches so she could reach up and touch his face. "I have been hoping you felt the same way. I have been falling for you since that first day when you lifted that wagon off me like it weighed nothing at all. Every day since then, every kindness you have shown me, every evening you have spent reading to me, it has all made me fall harder." The smile that broke across his face was like the sun coming out from behind clouds. "Really?" he asked, as though he could not quite believe it. "Really," she confirmed, and then he was kissing her, his arms careful around her as he supported her weight against him. His lips were warm and soft, and the kiss was everything she had imagined and more. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard. "I should probably ask your father's permission to court you properly," Yates said, resting his forehead against hers. "But I wanted you to know how I felt first." "He already likes you," Nora assured him. "I could see it in his eyes when he left. He trusts you with his most precious possession, me. I think he will be happy to give his blessing." They heard a discreet cough from the doorway and turned to find Mrs. Chen watching them with a satisfied smile. "About time," she said in her accented English. "I tell Mr. Yates 2 days ago he need to speak up or miss his chance. Good girl like Miss Nora, she not stay single forever." They both laughed, and Yates helped Nora to the table where Mrs. Chen served them supper. But everything felt different now, charged with new meaning. Every glance they exchanged held promise. Every accidental touch sent sparks through Nora's body. She could barely eat for the joy bubbling up inside her. That night, Yates read to her as usual, but he held her hand while he did so, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. When he finished the chapter, he leaned down and kissed her goodnight, a soft, sweet kiss that promised more to come. "Sweet dreams, Nora," he whispered against her lips. "Sweet dreams, Yates," she replied, and she knew they would be. The next few weeks passed in a blur of happiness. Nora's leg continued to heal, and she grew stronger each day. Yates taught her to navigate the ranch on her crutches, showing her the barn where he kept his horses, introducing her to the small crew of ranch hands who worked for him. They were all respectful and kind, clearly devoted to their boss. When James Olsen finally returned, having gotten time away from the mine, Yates asked for permission to court Nora formally. Her father looked between them, saw the way they gazed at each other, and gave his blessing without hesitation. "I can see she is happy," James said to Yates as they stood on the porch watching Nora feed apple slices to the horses. "Happier than she has been since her mother died. If you can promise to take care of her, to be good to her, then you have my permission to court her with the intention of marriage." "I promise," Yates said solemnly. "I will spend the rest of my life making her happy if she will have me." James clapped him on the shoulder. "I think she will, son. I think she already has chosen you in her heart." He stayed for 3 days, and during that time, he and Yates discussed practical matters. The homestead Nora and James had been living on was too isolated and too small to support them long term. James suggested selling it and using the money to expand Yates' ranch operations. In return, he would come to work for Yates, helping to manage the growing herd and the land. "I am getting too old for mining anyway," James admitted. "My lungs are not what they used to be. Ranch work would be better, and I would get to stay close to my daughter." Yates agreed immediately. "I would be glad to have you," he said. "And there is a small house on the far side of the property that the previous owner built. It needs some repairs, but it would give you your own space while keeping you nearby." It was perfect, and Nora could hardly believe how everything was falling into place. 2 months ago, she had been living an isolated, lonely existence, and now she was surrounded by people she cared about, with a future bright with possibility. By the time 6 weeks had passed since her injury, Doc Martinez declared her leg healed enough to walk without crutches, though he cautioned her to take it easy. There was still a slight limp, and he warned it might never completely go away, but Nora did not care. She was mobile again, and that was all that mattered. The first thing she did was help Mrs. Chen in the kitchen, insisting on learning to make some of the dishes Yates loved. The housekeeper was a patient teacher, and soon Nora was producing respectable meals, though nothing quite matched Mrs. Chen's skill. The second thing she did was convince Yates to take her riding. He was hesitant, worried about her leg, but she persisted until he agreed. He saddled a gentle mare and helped Nora mount, then climbed onto his own buckskin. They rode out across the valley, and Nora felt a freedom she had not experienced in months. "This is beautiful," she said, looking out at the rolling grassland dotted with cattle. "I can see why you love it here." "It is even more beautiful with you in it," Yates said, and she turned to find him watching her with such love in his eyes that it took her breath away. They dismounted near a small creek that ran through the property, and Yates spread a blanket on the grass. They sat together, watching the water flow past, and talked about their future. "I want to marry you, Nora," Yates said, taking her hand. "I know we have not been courting long by conventional standards, but when you know, you know. I have never felt this way about anyone, and I do not want to waste time pretending I am uncertain." "I want that too," Nora said, her heart soaring. "I want to be your wife, to build a life with you here on this ranch." "Your father wants to wait until fall for the wedding," Yates told her. "He says it will give you time to fully recover and for us to get the house ready. But I have to tell you, waiting feels like torture." Nora laughed and leaned against his shoulder. "Then we will fill the time with planning. I want a real wedding, Yates, with a celebration. I want our friends and neighbors to witness us promising ourselves to each other." "Whatever you want," Yates promised. "I will give you whatever you want." They kissed there by the creek, a long, slow kiss that spoke of desire and devotion in equal measure. When they finally pulled apart, Nora felt as though her heart might burst from happiness. The summer passed in a whirlwind of activity. James sold the homestead and came to work at the ranch full-time. He and Yates, along with the ranch hands, spent weeks repairing and expanding the small house on the property, turning it into a comfortable home for James. Nora threw herself into preparations for the wedding, sewing her dress with Mrs. Chen's help and planning the celebration with an enthusiasm that made everyone around her smile. Her leg continued to improve, the limp becoming less pronounced as the muscles strengthened. There were days when it ached, especially when rain was coming, but she learned to manage it. In truth, she barely thought about the accident anymore except to be grateful that it had brought Yates into her life. As the wedding approached, Nora found herself growing nervous. Not about marrying Yates, she was certain about that, but about the actual ceremony and celebration. She wanted everything to be perfect. The night before the wedding, Mrs. Chen sat with her in her room, helping her with final preparations. "You are worrying too much," the housekeeper said, seeing Nora's anxious expression. "Mr. Yates, he loves you, that is all that matters." "I know," Nora said. "I just want him to be proud of me, to feel like I am worthy of all the kindness he has shown me." Mrs. Chen made a dismissive sound. "He already proud. Anyone can see that, the way he looks at you, like you are the most precious thing in the world. You make him happy, Miss Nora. That is the greatest gift you can give him." The wedding took place on a crisp October day in 1878, with the aspens turning gold in the mountains around Fort Stanton. A traveling preacher performed the ceremony in the small church, with what seemed like the entire town in attendance. Nora wore a dress of cream-colored silk that she and Mrs. Chen had spent weeks making, with lace at the collar and cuffs. Her father walked her down the aisle, his eyes suspiciously bright, and placed her hand in Yates with visible emotion. Yates looked handsome in a new black suit, his hair neatly combed, his blue eyes shining as he watched her approach. When they stood before the preacher and spoke their vows, Nora's voice was clear and steady, without a trace of doubt. "I, Nora Olsen, take you, Yates Brennan, to be my lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, until death do us part." Yates repeated the vows, his voice deep and sure. And when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, he kissed her with such tender joy that several of the women in attendance sighed audibly. The celebration afterward was held at the ranch, with tables set up outside and enough food to feed an army. Mrs. Chen had outdone herself, producing dishes that drew compliments from everyone. There was music and dancing, and Yates led Nora in a waltz that made her feel like she was floating despite her lingering limp. As the sun set and the party continued around them, Yates pulled Nora away from the crowd, leading her to the porch of their house. Their house now, she realized with a thrill. "Happy?" he asked, wrapping his arms around her waist and pulling her close. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Nora said honestly. "When that wagon wheel broke and trapped my leg, I thought my life was over, but it was really just beginning." "We both got lucky that day," Yates said. "I was taking a different trail originally, but something made me change my route at the last minute. If I had not, I never would have found you." "Fate," Nora suggested, and Yates nodded. "Fate," he agreed. "Or divine providence, or just pure luck. Whatever it was, I am grateful for it every single day." They stood there together, watching the stars come out one by one over the New Mexico sky, listening to the sounds of celebration behind them. Nora felt a peace settle over her, a sense of rightness that went bone deep. This was where she belonged with this man on this land, building a life together. Their first year of marriage was filled with hard work and deep joy. Nora threw herself into life on the ranch, learning everything she could about cattle and horses and the rhythms of the seasons. She discovered she had a talent for managing the books, keeping meticulous records of expenses and income that helped Yates make better business decisions. Together, they expanded the herd and purchased more land, building the ranch into one of the most successful operations in the territory. James thrived in his new role, his health improving with the outdoor work and the satisfaction of being close to his daughter. He and Yates developed a friendship built on mutual respect and shared goals, and Nora often found them working side by side, talking and laughing like old friends. Mrs. Chen remained an integral part of their household, and Nora came to think of her as family. The older woman taught her not just cooking, but the wisdom that came from years of experience. She was there to offer advice during difficult times and celebration during good ones, a steady presence that enriched all their lives. In the spring of 1879, Nora discovered she was pregnant. The realization filled her with equal parts joy and terror. She had never given much thought to motherhood before, but now that it was becoming a reality, she found herself wanting it desperately. She told Yates one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, a ritual they had maintained throughout their marriage. "I have something to tell you," she said, taking his hand. He turned to look at her, concern flickering in his eyes. "Is everything all right? Is it your leg?" "My leg is fine," she assured him. "Better than fine, actually. It is something else." She took a breath, then said simply, "I am going to have a baby. We are going to have a baby." For a moment, Yates just stared at her as though he could not process the words. Then understanding dawned, and his face broke into the most radiant smile she had ever seen. "A baby," he breathed. "We are going to have a baby." "Yes," Nora confirmed, laughing at his stunned expression. "Doc Martinez confirmed it this afternoon." Yates let out a whoop of joy that startled the horses in the nearby corral. He swept Nora into his arms, spinning her around despite her protests, then set her down carefully as though she were made of glass. "A baby," he said again, shaking his head in wonder. "I am going to be a father." "And I am going to be a mother," Nora said, still marveling at the idea. "Are you happy?" "Happy." Yates cupped her face in his hands, looking at her with such love it made her want to cry. "Nora, you have given me everything I ever dreamed of and more. A home, a partner, a purpose, and now a child. I am beyond happy. I am blessed. He kissed her then, soft and reverent, and Nora felt tears slip down her cheeks. They were tears of joy, of gratitude for this life they were building together, of anticipation for the future that stretched out before them. James was delighted by the news, already planning to build a cradle and talking about teaching his grandchild to ride. Mrs. Chen immediately began knitting baby clothes, her needles clicking away during every spare moment. The entire ranch seemed to buzz with excitement about the coming addition. The pregnancy was not easy. Nora suffered from terrible sickness in the early months, and as she grew larger, the old injury to her leg began to ache more frequently. There were nights when Yates would massage her leg for hours, easing the pain so she could sleep. He was attentive and caring, anticipating her needs before she could voice them, and Nora fell even more deeply in love with him during this time. In November of 1879, as the first snow began to fall on the mountains, Nora went into labor. Doc Martinez had taken up residence in the spare room a week earlier, not wanting to risk being unable to reach them if the weather turned bad. Mrs. Chen hovered nearby, ready to help, while James paced in the main room and Yates held Nora's hand, refusing to leave her side despite the doctor's suggestions that he wait elsewhere. The labor was long and difficult, made more complicated by Nora's injured leg, which made certain positions impossible. There were moments when she thought she could not go on, when the pain seemed unbearable. But Yates was there through it all, his voice steady and encouraging, his presence an anchor in the storm. "You can do this," he told her, wiping sweat from her forehead. "You are the strongest person I know. You survived that wagon accident. You can survive this." And she did. As dawn broke over the ranch, painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of pink and gold, Nora gave birth to a healthy baby boy. The moment she heard his first cry, all the pain and fear melted away, replaced by a love so fierce and immediate it took her breath away. "A son," Doc Martinez said, placing the baby in her arms. "Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Brennan." Yates stared at his son with an expression of wonder, reaching out to touch the tiny hand with one finger. The baby's fingers curled around it instinctively, and Nora saw tears track down her husband's face. "He is perfect," Yates whispered. "Absolutely perfect." They named him Thomas James after Yates' father and Nora's, and he brought a new dimension to their lives. The ranch hands took turns peeking in to see the baby, offering gruff congratulations. James held his grandson with hands that trembled with emotion, and Mrs. Chen declared him the most beautiful baby she had ever seen. As Nora recovered from the birth, she found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this moment. Just 2 years ago, she had been trapped under a broken wagon, certain she was going to die alone on a dusty trail. Now she was surrounded by family, holding her newborn son while her husband dozed in the chair beside her bed. The transformation was so complete, so utterly unexpected, that it still sometimes took her breath away. The years that followed were rich and full. Thomas grew into a curious, adventurous boy who loved the ranch and everything about it. By the time he was 3, he was following Yates everywhere, mimicking his father's walk and trying to help with the chores. Yates was a wonderful father, patient and loving, teaching his son about the land and the animals with endless enthusiasm. In 1882, Nora gave birth to twin girls, Clara and Rose. The pregnancy had been a surprise, the discovery of twins an even bigger one. The births were easier than Thomas had been, though having 2 babies to care for instead of 1 proved to be a significant challenge. But Mrs. Chen stepped in to help, and between her and Yates and James, Nora never felt overwhelmed. The girls were different as night and day. Clara was serious and thoughtful, while Rose was outgoing and mischievous. They kept the entire household entertained with their antics, and Thomas proved to be a protective older brother, watching over them with a solemnity that made the adults smile. The ranch continued to prosper. Yates' reputation for fair dealing and quality cattle spread throughout the territory, and they were able to purchase adjoining land, expanding their operation. They hired more hands, built new barns and corrals, and established themselves as one of the leading ranches in New Mexico. But success never changed Yates. He remained the same kind, hard-working man Nora had fallen in love with, never putting on airs or forgetting where he came from. He treated his workers with respect, paid them fairly, and earned their loyalty in return. Nora managed the business side of things, her organizational skills and head for numbers proving invaluable. They were true partners in every sense of the word. In 1885, James' health began to decline. The years of mining had taken their toll on his lungs, and while the ranch work had slowed the damage, it could not reverse it entirely. He fought it for months, refusing to slow down, but eventually he had to accept his limitations. Nora nursed him as best she could, bringing him meals and sitting with him in the evenings, reading aloud or simply keeping him company. It was a reversal of their roles, and sometimes it made her heart ache to see her strong father so diminished. But James never complained. He said he had been given more than he deserved: years with his daughter and son-in-law, time with his grandchildren. He was ready, he said, to join his wife. He died peacefully one autumn evening with Nora holding one hand and Yates holding the other. His last words were, "Take care of each other," and they promised they would. They buried him on a hill overlooking the ranch, with a simple wooden cross marking the spot. Nora grieved deeply, but she found comfort in the knowledge that he had been happy in his final years, that he had seen her settled and content. And she had Yates and the children to help her through the loss, their love a balm for her sorrow. Life on the ranch continued. The children grew, each developing their own personalities and interests. Thomas, at 12, was already helping seriously with the ranch work, showing a natural aptitude for handling cattle and horses. The twins, at 10, were inseparable, always exploring the ranch together and getting into harmless trouble. In 1888, Nora gave birth to their fourth child, another boy they named William. He was a surprise, as she had thought their family was complete, but a welcome one. The children adored their baby brother, and even Thomas, now a gangly teenager, was gentle and patient with the infant. Mrs. Chen, now well into her 60s, finally agreed to take on less work, training a younger woman to help with the housekeeping while she focused on the cooking she loved. She remained a vital part of the family, her presence a constant in their ever-changing lives. As the 1890s began, Nora found herself in her mid-30s, mother of 4, wife to a man she loved more with each passing year. Sometimes, on quiet evenings when the children were in bed and she and Yates sat on the porch watching the stars, she would think back to that day the wagon wheel broke. "You ever regret it?" she asked Yates one such evening. "Taking on an injured woman, changing your whole life for me?" Yates turned to look at her, genuine surprise on his face. "Regret it? Nora, finding you that day was the best thing that ever happened to me. Before you, I had a ranch, yes, but it was just property, just work. You made it a home. You gave me a family, a purpose beyond just surviving. I would not change a single thing. Not even the sleepless nights with colicky babies, or the time Thomas tried to ride that bull and broke his arm, or when the twins decided to give themselves haircuts right before the church social." Yates laughed, pulling her close. "Not even those things. Every moment, good or bad, has been part of building this life with you, and I would not trade this life for anything in the world." Nora nestled against his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of him, leather and hay and something uniquely Yates. "I love you," she said simply. "I love you too," he replied. "From the moment I lifted that wagon wheel off your leg to this moment right now, and every moment until I draw my last breath." They sat there together as they had so many nights before, comfortable in the silence, secure in their love. The ranch spread out around them, a testament to their hard work and dedication. Inside the house, their children slept safely. Mrs. Chen puttered in the kitchen, preparing for the next day. This was home, real and solid and good. As Thomas grew older, he took on more responsibility with the ranch, eventually becoming his father's right hand. He had inherited Yates' natural skill with horses and cattle, combined with Nora's business sense. The twins, Clara and Rose, grew into beautiful young women who were courted by half the eligible men in the territory. Clara eventually married a doctor from Santa Fe, while Rose fell in love with one of the ranch hands, a steady young man named Michael who reminded Nora of a younger Yates. William, the youngest, showed an interest in law and talked about becoming a lawyer, a dream Yates and Nora supported wholeheartedly. In 1898, Nora and Yates celebrated their 20th wedding anniversary with a large party attended by friends from all over New Mexico. It was a joyous occasion, filled with music and laughter and storytelling. As Nora danced with her husband, his hair now touched with gray at the temples, her own showing threads of silver, she marveled at how far they had come. 20 years, Yates said, holding her close. "It has gone by so fast." "And yet it feels like I have known you forever," Nora replied. "Like my life before you was just a prelude." "Our life is not over yet," Yates reminded her with a smile. "We still have many years ahead of us, many more memories to make." He was right. They had years more together, watching their children grow and marry and have children of their own. They became grandparents multiple times over, the ranch house often filled with the sound of young voices. Thomas took over more and more of the daily operations of the ranch, allowing Yates and Nora to slow down and enjoy their later years. Mrs. Chen lived to a remarkable 90 years old, remaining sharp and engaged until the very end. When she passed peacefully in her sleep in 1905, the entire community mourned her loss. She had been more than a housekeeper. She had been family, and her absence left a hole in all their lives. But life continued as it always does. Seasons changed, children grew, the ranch evolved with the times. Through it all, Yates and Nora remained each other's constant, their love the foundation upon which everything else was built. In the summer of 1910, as Nora sat on the porch of the ranch house watching her grandchildren play in the yard, she thought about the journey that had brought her here. She was 54 years old now, her hair fully silver, her body bearing the marks of a life well lived. The old injury to her leg still ached on rainy days, a permanent reminder of the accident that had changed everything. Yates came out to join her, moving a bit slower these days but still strong and capable at 57. He settled into the chair beside her with a contented sigh, reaching over to take her hand as he always did, thinking deep thoughts. He asked, his voice still warm and teasing after all these years. "Just remembering," Nora said. "That day on the trail when I thought I was going to die. If someone had told me then that I would end up here with all of this, I never would have believed them." "Life has a funny way of working out," Yates agreed. "That broken wagon wheel brought you into my life, and I have been grateful for it every day since." "I almost lost my leg that day," Nora reflected. "But instead, I gained everything that matters. A husband, children, grandchildren, a home." All because you came along when you did and were brave enough and kind enough to help a stranger." "You were never a stranger," Yates said softly. "From the moment I saw you, something in my heart recognized you. Like I had been waiting my whole life without knowing what I was waiting for, and then suddenly, there you were." Nora turned to look at him, this man who had been her partner through everything, and felt her heart swell with love. "I know exactly what you mean," she said. "I knew it too, even through the pain. I knew you were going to be important to me." They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the sun paint the New Mexico sky in shades of orange and pink. Their grandchildren's laughter filled the air, a joyful sound that spoke of continuity, of legacy, of love passed down through generations. The ranch stretched out around them, prosperous and thriving, a testament to everything they had built together. Thomas and his wife, Sarah, lived in a house they had built on the eastern edge of the property, raising their own 3 children while managing the day-to-day operations of the ranch. Clara visited regularly from Santa Fe with her husband and 2 daughters, bringing news of the city and gifts for her parents. Rose and Michael had settled in a house on the western edge of the ranch, their 4 children adding to the chaos and joy of family gatherings. William had indeed become a lawyer, practicing in Albuquerque, but he made a point of coming home at least once a month, often bringing interesting stories about his cases. In 1912, New Mexico became a state, and the celebration that swept through the territory was echoed at the Brennan Ranch. Yates and Nora hosted a party that included not just family but their ranch hands and neighbors, everyone coming together to mark the historic occasion. As Nora watched the festivities, she felt a deep satisfaction. They had been part of building this state, had contributed to its growth and development through their work and their family. The years continued to pass, bringing both joys and sorrows as all lives do. They lost friends to age and illness, but they also welcomed new great-grandchildren into the family. The ranch continued to thrive under Thomas' management, adapting to the changing times while maintaining the values Yates and Nora had established. In the spring of 1920, as Nora approached her 64th birthday, she and Yates decided to take a trip back to the place where it all began. They rode out to the mountain trail where her wagon had broken down 42 years earlier. The trail was less used now, a newer road having been built lower in the valley, but it was still recognizable. They dismounted at the spot where Nora thought the accident had occurred. Time and weather had erased any physical evidence of that day, but standing there, she could still remember every detail. The heat, the pain, the fear, and then the sound of hoofbeats that had meant salvation. "Right about here," she said, pointing to a spot where the trail curved along the mountainside. "That is where the wheel broke." Yates stood beside her, his arm around her waist. "I came around that bend," he said, gesturing, "and there you were. The bravest, most beautiful woman I had ever seen, trapped and hurting but not giving up." "I was terrified," Nora admitted. "But then you were there, and somehow I knew it would be all right." "It was fate," Yates said, echoing the conversation they had on their wedding night all those years ago. "Or divine providence. Whatever brought me to you that day, I will be forever grateful." They stood there for a long time, remembering, reflecting on the long road they had traveled together. Finally, Yates helped Nora back onto her horse and they rode back to the ranch at an easy pace, enjoying the beautiful spring day. That evening, as they prepared for bed, Nora studied Yates in the lamplight. He was an old man now, his hair white, his face deeply lined by sun and wind and years. But to her, he was still the strong, capable cowboy who had lifted a wagon wheel and saved her life. She saw in him all the versions he had been. The earnest young man courting her, the the proud father holding his newborn son, the patient grandfather teaching children to ride, and the devoted husband who had been her constant companion through every moment of their life together. "What are you thinking about?" Yates asked, catching her gaze. "How lucky I am," Nora said simply. "How very, very lucky." "We both are," Yates replied, pulling her close. "We both are." They continued on for several more years, growing older but never losing the connection that had sparked between them on that dusty trail. They celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary in 1918 with another large party, surrounded by children and grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren. It was a celebration not just of their marriage, but of the life they had built, the family they had raised, the legacy they were leaving. Yates' health began to fail in his early 70s, his strong body finally succumbing to the accumulated wear of decades of hard work. He faced it with the same quiet courage he had shown throughout his life, never complaining, always grateful for the time he had been given. Nora stayed by his side through it all, just as he had stayed by hers through childbirth and illness and grief. On a quiet evening in late September of 1925, with autumn painting the mountains in gold and red, Yates Brennan passed away peacefully in his sleep with Nora's hand in his. He was 72 years old and had lived a full, rich life. The grief Nora felt was profound, a loss so deep it seemed to have no bottom. But alongside the grief was gratitude, for the 47 years they had together, for the family they had created, for every moment of love and laughter and partnership. They buried him on the hill next to James Olsen, with a view of the ranch he had built and loved. The funeral was attended by what seemed like half the state, a testament to the man he had been and the lives he had touched. Nora stood dry-eyed through the service, not because she was not sad, but because she knew Yates would not want her to spend the rest of her days in tears. He would want her to live, to enjoy her children and grandchildren, to find joy where she could. And she did. For the next 5 years, Nora Brennan lived on at the ranch, surrounded by family, still sharp and engaged despite her age. She told stories about the old days to her great-grandchildren, passing down the history of how their family came to be. She talked about the wagon accident, about the brave cowboy who saved her, about the love that grew between them. She wanted them to know, to understand, that sometimes the worst moments of our lives can lead to the best. In the spring of 1930, Nora fell ill with pneumonia. Despite the care of doctors and the devotion of her family, she did not recover. On a warm May afternoon, with wildflowers blooming across the valley and her family gathered around her, Nora Olsen Brennan passed away at the age of 74. They buried her beside Yates on the hill, and if anyone had been there to see, they might have noticed how perfectly the two graves fit together, side by side, just as the couple had been in life. The ranch continued under Thomas ownership, passed down through the generations that followed, and the story of Yates and Nora became family legend, told and retold to each new child born into the Brennan line. It was a story of chance and choice, of a wagon wheel that broke at exactly the right moment, of a cowboy who took a different trail and found his destiny. It was a story of pain transformed into joy, of strength found in partnership, of a love that lasted not just a lifetime but beyond, echoing through the generations that followed. It was, in the end, exactly the kind of story that the Wild West was built on. Unexpected, dramatic, and ultimately, deeply, profoundly human. The ranch still stands today, though much changed from those early days. But the hill where Yates and Nora rest remains untouched, a quiet place where wildflowers grow and the wind whispers through the grass. And if you stand there at sunset, looking out over the valley they loved, You can almost imagine you hear them still. His voice reading poetry, her laughter in response, the quiet contentment of two souls who found each other against all odds and built something beautiful that would last long after they were gone. It was a love story written in broken wagon wheels and splinted bones, in hard work and shared dreams, in children's laughter and the peaceful silence of two people who no longer needed words to understand each other. It was a story of the Wild West at its finest, not the violence and lawlessness that filled dime novels, but the quiet heroism of ordinary people building extraordinary lives in an unforgiving land. And it all began with a simple act of kindness. A cowboy who stopped to help a stranger and found his whole world change in the process.